So I'm here again with Andy and James as we continue our conversation on prayer. Whenever we look at the prayer that Jesus taught us as his disciples to pray, um, I guess the central line of it is, "God, let your kingdom come, your will be done." And we talked about in the previous video, Andy, of just the rising tide of self help, of us, I guess, caving life in on ourselves, whereas the invitation of the kingdom is to move outwards, love God and love of neighbor. Um, could you just speak a little bit more to how prayer takes the focus off of ourselves and sets our focus and our attention on Jesus? You, as we swim in the waters of a self-helpy, self-dominated, self-obsessed age, it feels as if prayer and the invitation to commit to being a house of prayer actually is remarkably countercultural. So could you just speak to some of that a little bit more?
Well, it depends fundamentally what you're praying about.
Right.
Like if all your prayers are, God help me,
Sure.
Make my life better,
Sure.
then like I think there's no change there.
Yeah.
I think that's where when Jesus sets up like the answer to like how should we pray, and he's like, well, pray like this.
Yes.
And first of all, um, the initial lines of what effectively is the disciples' prayer more than it's the Lord's prayer, but whatever, it is, focusing on God, not ourselves, and then focusing on what He's doing, not what we're doing. And I think that is the ultimate for me in terms of the goal of spiritual formation, Christian discipleship, life with Jesus, whatever language you want to wrap around that, is that we would find our lives in the mission of God, not invite God into the mission of our lives. That is such a fundamental shift. It doesn't mean, go get a different job, go start a different university degree, move house, whatever. Maybe, but that's not what it means. It's like the kingdom of God is in breaking into our everyday, ordinary lives. So how do you orientate your life around trying to see that and join in with that?
Yeah.
So in terms of like getting us off the slightly more self-interest fueled, thing, it's all around what's actually driving your life.
Yes.
Like, is the engine of your life personal happiness, contentment, peace, financial security, physical health, whatever language you want to wrap around that. And I think part of that is like, I am just amazed. Like, and again, my kids say I'm old, so maybe that's what this is. But like, I am amazed at like the different silver bullets that are being shouted at me every day of like what I, so something come up the other day of like, if you're waking up between 2 and 4 in the morning, it's because you have a magnesium deficiency.
Right.
And if you can take magnesium supplements, you don't wake up between 2 and 4 anymore. Like that's like shouted at us like facts. You're like, flip me. I was like, do you know about magnesium? I wake up quite a lot at that sort of time in the morning, and I fall asleep quickly again. I'm like walking around going, maybe I have a magnesium deficiency. I'm like, what? Like, and maybe it's true, but like that's just one example of like there are just so many things, like I spent a bit of time back in the mountains this summer, and I've been sort of maybe re-energized and re-inspired around that, and so I'm like doing a bit of reading about like training and whatever. Like the amount of convinced contradictory advice of like, you need to do this, no, you need to do this. If you're doing this, you're getting wrong. And never mind the fact that my phone's listening to me and I coach my boys' rugby team, and now I'm bombarded with like teenage athlete madness of like what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And like, if you coach like this, then you're, limiting your kids. Or if you want to give your kids an advantage, you should be doing this. And you're like looking at these things that are opposites, going, how? Like, and any wonder we're like a bit paralyzed and like anxious and whatever. And all of that coming back into the kind of what's fueling, forming our imagination of like what we're actually longing for, And that's why like I just love, like I'm so grateful for a theology and a reality, like a lived experience of the presence of God that doesn't deny any of these things. It's not like, maybe the magnesium thing's true. Who knows? Anybody watching this, like, let me know. I'll start taking magnesium supplements and maybe sleep better. But it's like, my fundamental question isn't like, where am I deficient? Or where am I like falling behind? Or where's my family falling behind? My fundamental question is, Jesus, what are you doing around me? What are you doing around me? What are you doing in the lives of the people around me? And how do I get involved? What does that actually look like? And I think if we can, I was listening to one commentator the other day talking about like the fundamental idea of societies that have been formed out of Judeo-Christian values. It's the idea of sacrificing for the sake of others. That's what makes it society, not just me. Like if I actually care about society, then I have to say, right, well, what am I prepared to give up so that the whole can thrive? Like that's actually the fruit of some of the ideas of what Jesus was actually talking about in a much more cultural, who cares what your faith is, you know, and in terms of like how society actually flourishes and functions. And what's really interesting, not to get all geopolitical in a conversation about prayer, but like when we look at where societies are fracturing, it is the absence of the willingness to actually lose something that I need or want so that someone else can have. And like that, we just see that everywhere. And there's suspicion of people of different colors or races or from different places, and we have to protect people and all that sort of stuff. And what's the root of all of that? It's like, well, if you're here, I lose. And I'm like, well, what if we actually went, how do I give up so that you can have? Then I don't need to be afraid. I'm already. I'm just like, well, hey, you need some food, I can get you some food, or whatever. I know that's a really simplistic idea, but it's speaking to the kind of the root of like what do we actually think solves these problems, and what do we think actually makes us live more whole lives? That's what Jesus is asking us to do. Come and live whole lives, regardless of where your health currently is or your finances currently are. It's like, is it possible that we could actually be whole? It's not the absence of challenge and trouble. It's not the absence of some kind of, gosh, I'm a bit stressed about that, but it is about like the forming of our lives. And for me, that's what prayer does, because it's constantly going, right, well, what prayers am I praying? And if I'm not praying, God, what do you want to say to me? Like, what are you doing around me? How do I get involved in that? How should I be helping that person? Like I find myself there with the kids all the time. Is in my prayer about my kids. It's not like, God, help them be class. It's help me see who they are. What are you saying about them, and how is my behavior getting in the way of what you're trying to do there? Right. Those are the prayers I pray for my kids. It's not like, make their lives easy. Sure. Totally. Or easier. Like, in fact, that's really unhelpful.
Thanks, Andy. That's so helpful. Like, James, whenever we've been exploring what it looks like for us as a community to be a house of prayer, to be the kind of people that are not so focused on ourselves, but always looking to what Jesus is doing in the world and asking him to form us in his way of serving others and seeing the kingdom come. I know that you in particular have been drawing a lot of influence and inspiration from the people of God, the Levites, who in the Old Testament would have built altars and would have tended to the flame, is the language of the Old Testament, never wanting, I guess, the altar or the fire on the altar of devotion, worship, adoration to kind of die out. Can you just speak a little bit more to why you're drawing inspiration from them, and also what their devotion to Yahweh back in the day, what that sparks for you in your imagination of what is possible for our community?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, like it's been kind of front and center for me, this idea. It just seems to be everywhere I kind of go at the minute. That seems to be like the text that's in front of me, that in Leviticus, that captures that idea of the Levites tending to the flame, whether it's in my reading, listening, It just seems to be everywhere, especially actually when I went over the States there a couple of months ago, happened to get some time with the Upper Room guys, and that Sunday I was there. Michael Miller, the pastor, was actually teaching into this text, and it was for the first time it kind of felt like he was articulating some of the longings I had, not just for myself but for this community.
Sure.
Around this idea. So which is basically to say, like, kind of the way he unpacked it was that, like, the Hebrew thought was that first initial sacrifice, that God sent the fire, he started the flame, so he started it, but it was the priest's job to steward it.
Right.
And so, like, if you think about a fire, you know, you can't just throw one log on and expect it to be lit in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Or you can't put coal on and expect the fire to be lit the next day. There's this continual tending to the flame, you know, through sacrifices and burnt offerings. So day and night, night and day. So if we take that concept through from tabernacle temple to now our hearts, where the flame is to be tended to, what does that look like? And I think for me, like, the thing that really, and it actually kind of bounces off what Andy said quite well, of just like it's still sacrifice that God's looking for in that, you know, so it just looks different. So back then it was a sacrifice of, you know, birds and goats and lambs and different things, whereas now the sacrifice is thanksgiving, praise and prayer. And I think that's the thing that kind of, I suppose I could talk all day long about the creative ideas that sparks for prayer, and to see a 24/7 room of prayer and all of these things. But I think the more important thing to state is, and what inspires me about this text for this journey that we're about to go on, is that the road ahead is marked by sacrifice. It has to be. And I think for us to move towards this, that's a really good thing for us to kind of understand. From Old Testament to now, in order for us to tend to the flame, it requires sacrifice.
One of the things that I've appreciated just about your leadership here is, like, and probably in many of our imaginations, like, you're the worship guy, yet knowing you, like, we could both attest to this, you're also an intercession guy. And there is something about the interconnection of adoration and intercession that is, I don't think is talked about anywhere near enough. If you go through the order of the Lord's Prayer, you know, it's hallowed be your name, your kingdom come. And there's a comma there, it's not a full stop between those. You know, there's an element of, like, these things flow into each other. Can you just speak just to that interconnection of worship and prayer, for, as Andy's been so helpfully leading us through, prayer for the sake of others and being formed in that way? Like, what is the interconnection between adoration and intercession?
Yeah, I mean, like, we say it all the time in our community, like, worship and prayer are two sides of the same coin, or to use your language, adoration and intercession. And to go back to this idea of tending to the flame, it's probably the easiest way to kind of show and explain how these things are interconnected. So, like, the flame was indicative of what the Lord was doing. So how brightly the flame burnt was a sign of what God was doing in terms of the levels. So you know, there's loads of examples of when if we take worship, you know, as being this sacrifice onto tending to the flame, when the flame burnt dimly, like Eli, who it said in 1st and 2nd Samuel, the flame burnt dimly because they weren't tending to the flame correctly, which when you read around that story, the Lord kind of looked distant and wasn't really up to much. Same in Malachi, where they kind of tried to cut corners and give sacrifices and offerings as their worship that weren't following the Lord's commands. And the same thing, it felt like the hand of God was off the people of God in that time. And there was one theologian, I wrote this down, that kind of described this by saying, how the priesthood goes, so goes the nation. And I think it's a really good way of actually explaining how these two things are interconnected. You know, like, So yeah, we're not necessarily tending to a flame in a tabernacle or a temple, but I do think there's an interconnection between how we tend to this flame now and what the Lord's doing in the valley area, or what he's doing, because how brightly this flame is kind of burning is, I think, a reflection on what the Lord will be doing around us. So that's how those things are interconnected, you know. I think like how we tend to this through sacrifice of praise and prayer and worship will be a reflection on what the Lord's doing around us. So it's the hallowed be your name, but it's also the same thing as your kingdom come, you know. Is that kind of answer?
No, it's so helpful, and I guess it's Andy, just to land this, is jump off something James said. Like, this does require sacrifice. And like I love Ronald Rolheiser talks about the art of prayer comes down to what he describes as a dogged fidelity, similar to like our marriages. Like, we have a dogged fidelity to the ones that we love, and through thick and thin, through good days and bad days, that fidelity, the vows that we made to our wives on our wedding day, those are the things that we commit to every single day. And it is the same whenever it comes to our commitment or our sacrifice unto the Lord. Like, there is a need for commitment. And I guess could you just speak to how we can just embody this sort of dogged fidelity whenever it comes to prayer?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the reality is it is an individual thing, but if you think your life can, if you can hold anything in your life for any length of time without habits, you're like, it's lost. So if you think of the marriage analogy, like there are micro acts of love, if you want to think about it in that way, that are not, that don't come out of desire, they come out of habit. So like, Dana and I have quite a specific set of times when I'm on coffee in the morning or she's on coffee in the morning, like such a small thing. Every day starts with an act of love, every single day. It doesn't matter if we've had an argument the night before, or like if we've got a busy day, or it has got no connection whatsoever to how we're feeling.
Sure.
You can zoom out from there in terms of like our habits around time together, or connection, space with kids, without kids, all those sorts of things. But there is, and every family will inhabit certain habits differently. But the question I would ask is, if you don't know what your habits are that hold your hopes and your hearts, then it's a disaster waiting to happen. Like if your actions are connected to your feelings, like, good luck. And I think that is, and look, I mean, I've been married for 17 years. My kids are right, I am getting old. Like, there is ebbs and flows in the felt emotion of it, and like that's just the reality of life. And I think so it is with our relationships with God, that there are habits that hold our hopes and our hearts. There are things that I engage in on a regular daily basis that express my dependence, desire, and love for God, regardless of how I'm feeling.
Yes.
And if I'm only ever waiting to feel it, like, I don't know if I'll do it. Yeah, and so that's the thing. It's not about what the habit is,
yes.
And I think most of us overestimate what our habits can actually hold. I want a 2-hour morning routine. It's like, well, who has time for that? Get yourself 5 minutes. It's solid every day. It'll serve you way better over 10 years than 6 months of 2 hours. And then you don't have time, or something interrupts it, or whatever. And likewise throughout the day, like, and I am bad at this, like, I'm so aware of it, but like I try in the car when I arrive at a place I'm going to go do something, regardless of kind of what it is, just take a moment and invite Jesus, like in, and it's more about me inviting myself into what he's doing. But do you know what I mean? It's just that habit of like, okay, hold on. Jesus, help me to see you in this moment. Like that habit is like daily. I mean, people listen to this, well, if they're sick, listen to me say like 2 most important prayers you can pray. God, what do you see? What do you say? Absolutely. I mean, those are habits for me.
Absolutely.
And they hold the whole thing. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but
no, it really is. And I think it one, being able to name your habits and also to stick with them And I think that's really helpful. Of be realistic, but be consistent. I think is really the key in all of this. Lads, thank you so much for all of us. There's so much in there. I really appreciate your time.